Welcome to 11 Investigates Case Files, where we reopen some of the investigations you've seen on TV and uncover the stories behind the headlines. I'm Melissa Andrews. This week, we're talking about police officers and deputies getting in trouble either on the job or while off duty.
And I am lead investigator Brian Duggar. In some ways, this is related to our OPATA investigation from last year. Now, OPATA stands for Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy. And Attorney General Dave Yost set up an OPATA portal where you can look into an officer's work history. And what we found last year is that some bad officers were jumping from department to department. But recently, you got a tip about a Lucas County Sheriff's deputy.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but a couple people have given me tips just through Facebook, and we've got people here who happen to know people in their regular everyday lives who work in some of these departments, and it really seems like these tips are coming from within these departments. The one that we're going to show you right now is, I think, the one that kind of set off. Sometimes when we air an investigative story, people kind of come out of the woodwork and say, well, look at this person, this happened. So take a look at the story of Kris Matuszewski. He resigned from the Lucas County Sheriff's Office after multiple DUIs, and he had also been drinking on the job. So take a look at this story.
This bottle of vodka kicked off a series of events which led Sergeant Kris Matuszewski to resign from the Lucas County Sheriff's Office on August 1st. An internal affairs document dated January 29, 2024 states Matuszewski bought the bottle from the liquor store when he should have been working and drank it in his truck. He then admitted to drinking a couple of times while on duty at the juvenile and common pleas courts. Documents show he was placed on paid leave that day. He was demoted, assigned to the records division, and given 15 days suspension in late February. But by early March, Matuszewski was back in internal affairs. This time, he admitted to getting into a crash in Sylvania and leaving. Here are photos of his damaged truck. 11 Investigates pulled the police report in which the victim stated he was very adamant that he did not want me to call the cops.
Just talking to you here, I can tell you're under the influence.
It was 2 weeks later, on March 22, 2024, that Matuszewski couldn't avoid the cops. He was pulled over in a rental car when a woman reported reckless driving near Highland Meadows Golf Course. The officer states he can smell alcohol, and Matuszewski's speech is slurred and difficult to follow.
Okay, turn around, put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest. OVI, Kris.
No.
No, we're not. Put your hands behind your back. Kris. Doing a good job listening now, don't stop.
On the way to the station, Matuszewski emphasizes he's law enforcement and begs not to be booked in jail.
You still work for the sheriff's office or not?
Yes, sir.
Currently?
Seriously. I know. I did. I was drinking. I'm not going to put you in a bad situation, but I would not like it.
Matuszewski's family is allowed to pick him up, but the sheriff's office still finds out about the DUI. He signs a last chance agreement with the union and sheriff in May. He's demoted to a corrections officer, suspended for 28 days, must submit to breath and urine testing, and go to AA once a week for 2 years.
Hey, what's going on?
What's up?
Hey, I'm Deputy Crane Sheriff's Office.
Trouble comes again on July 18th, 2025. It's 8:30 a.m.
So when they go to bed.
You just want to go to bed? Okay.
A driver spots Matuszewski stopped in the road at Yankee and Clark in Ottawa Lake, Michigan. That driver calls 911, saying he's slumped over and slurring, reeking of alcohol. Matuszewski refuses sobriety tests and is arrested by a Monroe County deputy.
Put your hands behind your back.
Don't do that. Just don't take me to the county.
Okay.
Don't take me to the county.
Do you know where you're at right now?
No.
You're in Michigan.
I have no idea.
The two get in the cruiser, and Matuszewski repeatedly asks to be taken home, not to jail, that he'll lose his job.
I understand that.
Really gonna put me in there.
In the 2.5 hours they were together, Matuszewski gets belligerent, calling the deputy names when they go to the hospital for a blood test.
No, I just don't. I don't appreciate you refusing and then consenting and then refusing again. So you put me in a very awkward position. So now, yeah, I have to go get a search warrant.
They arrive at the hospital and Matuszewski tries to talk, deputy to deputy.
You know I'm gonna lose my job. I'm not losing my job.
I don't know how your department works.
So I'm losing my job. But thanks.
Over the next hour, he complains about being cuffed. He wants to go to sleep.
I'm an officer and you don't.
I get it, but I don't know you. So
You don't know me.
you're gonna stay in handcuffs until the blood draw, okay?
He then falls on the floor.
Thanks.
I think this story had several people just out and about tell me they were sad to see this. And I think there is, a part of it that is sad. But I think what's more disturbing is you have multiple instances where someone who part of their job could have been, he was actually a security for the courts.
Yes.
But this is a law enforcement officer, and out there just driving well above the legal limit multiple times. And, you hate to think that your family or anyone else's family would be sharing those roads with someone in that condition.
So I know a lot of people, because you've now done several stories on police officers who have gotten in trouble. And unfortunately, a lot of them have dealt with alcohol. I know a lot of people on social media have reached out and said, this is ridiculous. Why are you picking on officers, cops? I mean, why don't we just tell every time a nurse gets a DUI or a doctor gets a DUI? But I think what those people aren't really grasping is, again, I think a police officer, they need to be kind of held to a higher standard. And if this guy is going to go out, and again, I know he was working in court, but at one time he was on the roadways. If he's going to go out and pull people over for drinking and driving, how do we know if this guy has an alcohol problem that he's going to be like, well, this guy just has an alcohol problem, so I'm going to let him go, or I'm going to cut him a deal. So, they need to be held to a higher standard. And what we've also found, a lot of times, he had a lot of other instances in his internal affairs file.
And he was drinking on the job and even left work to go buy alcohol. So, there you are in a situation where you're in charge of the safety of the courtroom and drinking on the job. So,
yeah, I believe he had an open bottle of vodka in his car, right, at work. And this was his last chance. And I think, you've had conversations with people within the department. I believe they tried to get him help, and
yeah.
He just didn't want to get help.
And I think that's the tough part is they can't really, comment because you've got the union involved, and per the union agreement, they can't comment, the administration, on things like this, except to confirm that there's a resignation or a firing. But we do know that help was offered. And I think that in a lot of these cases, just like we've seen, I think in private companies, more help is offered these days than it would have been. It's looked at it as a problem that we want to help you fix in many places of business. And I think that extends to some of these departments. And, some of these officers do see some very violent things. They see a lot of tragedy, and there is PTSD in some cases. And so I think they try to work with them on that. But you can't have someone out. And this, in a lot of these cases that we're talking about today, it's not someone who had an extra beer at dinner. These people are just out driving blacked out in some cases.
Yeah, 2, 3, 4 times over the legal limit we've seen. And unfortunately, a lot of times when we get a tip like this about a police officer or anything, but particularly a police officer, we're saying, well, we want their personnel file, their disciplinary file. We want to see if there's anything else there. And unfortunately, a lot of times when we look at these files, we see multiple cases that we didn't know about. But this is just coming up because we got a tip, but we didn't know about it 3 or 4 other times. And that's what's really concerning to us, is that there's a lot of things out there that we don't know about. So what we've started doing is an 11 Investigates team, we're starting to ask for internal affairs files from all the big departments, around the area. And because we don't want these officers to be disciplined kind of in the shadows, stuff like that happening. And we think it's important because we've seen some really crazy things that we're even going to talk about, in the show, but we want to find those.
Yeah, I mean, these are stories that we've aired on our news channel. However, as we've begun looking at some of these IA internal affairs investigative files, we've seen that there have been other violations that maybe have happened 6 months, 7 months ago. So we're not going to necessarily just air those out of the blue, but it does tell us that, like you said, these things are happening. And, had we not had a tip, we wouldn't have even known about these 9 cases that we're bringing you today.
Yeah. And at the top of the show, we talked about our OPATA investigation last year. And what we found in that, we were looking at the OPATA database, and we could see a officer's employment history. And, since June of 2021, they now have to give a reason when they've separated from a department. So it's like resignation in lieu of investigation. And we were seeing people jumping, bad officers, from one to another department, and that department not even knowing about it.
So you touched on what OPATA is at the top of the podcast, but talk about what the Attorney General did and why he did that, and why this is helping to make it harder for these officers who are problematic to jump from department to a department.
Right, and we talked to the Attorney General for that investigation, and he's very concerned because there had been cases where an officer got in trouble, maybe a union protected them, they buried the discipline. Because a lot of times what we've seen with the union things, so if they separate from a department, they let them resign in lieu of being terminated. And like in their separation agreement, I've seen this over and over, the separation agreement's like, okay, so if a future employer calls you, you can't say that I resigned because I was under investigation. You just have to say, yes, Brian Duggar worked here for the last 6 years. And what we had seen in one case, Robert Austin, he became the police chief in Delta, and he was going to be fired from the Sylvania Township Police Department. And this exactly happened. They buried it in the separation agreement, that you can't tell a future employer that I'm in trouble. So, I had gone to Delta and said, did you know this guy was being fired? They didn't know. And this is what Attorney General Dave Yost was trying to avoid, which you just mentioned. And again, back in June of 2021 on OPATA, now a department is required to say why that person left. Did they resign in good standing? Did they resign under investigation? Were they terminated? That has to be on the OPATA record. So these cities and townships, they should be able to go right to OPATA and look this up. And so you encountered this with another tip when we were talking about Michael Ervin.
Yeah, let's pull up video of the Michael Ervin situation. We received a tip, information about this Walbridge police officer. He was called because some people showed up basically at their home in Walbridge. Their truck door in their driveway was open, so they didn't know what was going on. They don't know if there was a burglary, if maybe someone was in their house. So they called the police, and Officer Michael Ervin shows up, and they notice that he appears to be intoxicated himself. And so they call back to 911 and say this officer that showed up is intoxicated, and it was Lake Township, and I forget the other police department that showed up.
Yeah, Lake Township.
And they showed up and confronted him, and that's the body camera that you just saw. But he was fired because he had been drinking and his blood alcohol was 0.168, and that happened on August 23rd. But then we looked into his OPATA and found that there should have been a red flag for the Walbridge Police Department when it came to Officer Ervin.
Yeah, I mean, he previously worked for the Toledo Police Department, and he had 3 separate incidents where he had been involved in some sort of alcohol-related accident. And the one that kind of broke the camel's back, so to speak, in Toledo, he had, I believe he was like 2 or 3 times over the legal limit, and his truck went off-road, and then it came through this brush, and it went airborne and landed on these railroad tracks, and he got hit by a train. And I'm blanking on where this...
Erie, Michigan.
Erie, up in Michigan, right? And in that case, that case actually got dismissed by the prosecutor at that time because they didn't think, like the train employee, they said he wasn't being cooperative anymore, and the person that drew the blood, they weren't able to track her down or something, and they needed her to testify. So they ended up dropping that case. And I had actually reached out to the current prosecutor up in Erie and said, this is ridiculous. You know, this should not, he said, looking at the notes, it looked like it just got dropped. Like they quit investigating it. Why did they quit investigating? I don't know. And he said he was going to get to the bottom of that, and that charges could actually be filed in the future. So when we had talked to Walbridge, or when you had talked to Walbridge, I believe the mayor said, well, that case up in Erie got dismissed, and there really wasn't anything else in his background search, right?
Mm-hmm. That is what he said. But then he also kind of put it on the police chief saying, you know, I rely on my department heads to make the correct hiring decisions. And I asked if they were aware of the OPATA database, which, by the way, anybody can access and look up any officers in any department and see what their standing was and where they previously worked. The mayor said he was not aware of the OPATA database, but then pledged that they would take a serious look at how they do hire officers, because it actually wasn't just Officer Michael Ervin there in Walbridge. There was Officer Austin Sabo, who is charged with 21 counts of statutory rape, sexual battery, and other charges involving multiple victims, including a 12-year-old, and that's between May and September of 2019. Here he is. And he previously worked in Put-in Bay and Clay Township, and on the OPATA database, Walbridge, if they had looked, would have seen that it says resignation, mandatory explanation required. Can you talk a little bit about what different designations there are in OPATA for the hiring managers or chiefs or mayors of cities to look at, and what those mean? Can they get an in-depth explanation? Because you did mention that at times the union will come in per those separation agreements and scrub some of the information from the file.
Yeah, and so basically when they separate from a department, there's a form, and they can do it online. There's also a printed out form they can mail it in, but there's boxes that they need to check that, you know, Brian Duggar resigned in good standing, he resigned under investigation, he resigned mandatory explanation required, which essentially means under investigation. So that
should be a red flag.
Right. So this is the point, and this is the entire idea behind doing this on the OPATA database. So you're not going to be able to click the officer's file, and you're not going to get a bunch of records. But what you get is that it's under investigation. Then you can do what we do. There may be a separation agreement, which, you know, some of these separation agreements you should be able to get through a public records request. But if even take that out of the equation, you can still get their disciplinary file. We get them all the time. Like, we have to say specifically, not personnel file, we want their disciplinary file, because some police departments keep two separate files. And if you ask for personnel file, you never see their discipline. But once you see resignation under investigation, these agencies should reach out to the departments and say, hey, we'd like to see the disciplinary.
Well, I will tell you that there's one case that we have not aired, and this involves a local department and an officer who's been there for many, many years, got a DUI last fall, and then also in 2007. I received the IA file and the personnel file, and I'm saying, where is the original DUI? Now, police departments are also only required to keep certain infractions in the file for so many years. It's not like if you got in trouble at WTOL and did this, and this, you did this in 2012, you did this in 2017, and this in 2022, your boss could say, hey, you've got a history of X, Y, and Z. This stuff is being removed from their files.
Yeah, in some cases it's 3-4 years. So,
Is the time limit,
They
right.
could have done the worst thing 5 years ago and we would never know about it. Now, when you look at Walbridge, they were able to fire
Austin
these
Sabo.
officers immediately without any sort of
And that's because they
investigation.
don't have a union representation there for those officers. They don't have to
Yep.
go through the same process.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we do want to look at and give a fair shake to is go to some of these union departments and see what is the process, because I know that they also have an obligation to represent the officer. They may not agree with what's happened or some of the discipline or lack thereof, but they're required to represent that officer as well. So I think that's something that we will continue to pursue as we get to the bottom of why it seems that there's been so many cases. I mean, we have 9 within just, I am including one that happened in March, but I would say 8 within the summer months that we're aware of.
Yeah, and again, most of them are drinking related. And as you mentioned, look, I mean, these guys and women see some of the worst things that no human being should ever have to see. So it's understandable that a lot of them have a hard time dealing with that.
And that's a part of the conversation. It has been for years as well, is getting counseling or showing that they're demonstrating that there's access to service here, or please take advantage of mental health services or addiction treatment.
Yeah, and is it doing them a disservice if they get 2, 3, 4 different chances after they make these mistakes because they're being protected? You know, I mean, that's a question I think we need to ask too. Is it a disservice to these people if they know, hey, I'm still going to be able to keep my job? And you know, I don't know, but you know, there was also another tip that you got, and this was, and this really did go wild online, and this had nothing to do with drinking, but it was a Toledo police officer that got in trouble at Walmart. And in this case, we're talking about Gregory Long. Gregory Long got in trouble at Walmart. We're going to show the surveillance video of Gregory Long at Walmart. But can you just talk about
Well,
this
and I
case?
think, again, I think that one can only surmise that some of these tips are coming from within the department. And so to me, what does that say? That says that the majority of officers are doing good and they are following the rules and they like order and they like accountability. And so when they know of someone who's stepped outside of that, they want the accountability piece. And so this tip came to us as well. Gregory Long, he is a Toledo police officer. He was arrested for stealing from the Holland and Toledo Walmarts on multiple occasions in June and July. You can see in the other picture that we just briefly showed, he is wearing a Toledo police officer's t-shirt with a badge on it. He is currently the subject of an IA investigation. He's charged with 2 counts of theft and these were petty items that he was stealing, a couple of food items and things like that. And so he is in the court system right now, and again, he's the subject of an IA investigation there at the Toledo Police Department.
Yeah, he sold cheese. And then what happened, so they were seeing this in Holland, and then I think they had reached out to like the Glendale one, right?
He started at Glendale, and then Glendale Walmart called over to Holland Walmart and said, this guy's stolen from us multiple times, check on your surveillance, and sure enough, he was found to have at the Holland Walmart as well.
And I think in one case, he was kind of scanning items and like scanning one, allegedly, and then dropping another one in a bag without scanning it, and an employee came over and said, hey, you're scanning that wrong, you didn't scan that, this is how you need to do it. They showed him, and then the report says, he continued on.
So it wasn't an accident.
Right, and he wasn't not scanning a big screen TV. These were really small items that I think amounted to only $30 or something like that. And then, of course, we're thinking, why in the world would you jeopardize your career over such little thing? We got some things online. People are like, well, maybe he didn't have something to eat that day, and he didn't have the money to pay for it. But he was stealing like chocolate candy. I mean, if you're really starving, I doubt you're going to be.
And I just don't,
trying to get.
I just don't think you can apply the different rules here. I mean, that's someone's
Right.
opinion. You got to stick within the facts. The facts are
Sure.
this, and this.
Right,
that he stole these items, and he's not above the law.
Right.
And when you start saying people are above the law, then you have real big problems.
Sure. And, I said stole. I mean, again, he's accused of not properly scanning this and paying for it. But again, at this point, it's still an accusation. And Mel, I really looked into this. I'm like, is this a real thing? I mean, is this unusual? So I just Googled, police officers stealing from Walmart. And there was story after story of police officers just taking, again, like $5, $6 worth of stuff. And there were like these big news stories, broadcast stories, newspaper stories. And we're like, what is going on? I mean, is it just kind of a thrill of it kind of thing?
Well, I think, again, we all want to know these answers, but like people have said on social media, maybe he didn't have a meal, or, he's a police officer, so leave him alone. But, again, it's not for us to just, you could also easily say, well, maybe he thought he was above the law and he should just take that thing. So that's why we stick within the facts of here's what he's accused of doing. He's going to court, and, maybe one day he'll choose to comment on why he did what he allegedly did.
Right. And again, people ask, who cares? It's $5. It's a $3 chocolate bunnies, or what, chocolate turtles actually is what it was. Why does this even matter? Why are we going to ruin an officer's career? But you think about it, this is a guy, when he graduated from the police academy, and he's a black officer. When he graduated from the police academy, there's clearly not enough. They try to recruit black officers who can go out in the community and gain the trust of community. And he said, I want to be a role model for my community. So then you
And
got
he
this
really
guy in
did say
Walmart.
that, right.
He
really
did say that. So then he's in Walmart, and it's clearly not a good example, and it's not. So, yeah.
TPD also had another, we're going to be talking about the cadet, Tanya Sherman. She resigned from the latest class of the Toledo Police Academy August 26th. This is one day after she was arrested for domestic violence and assault on her partner. This is just a quick one. It seemed like it was resolved pretty quickly. She immediately left, and to my understanding, she doesn't have any of the bargaining power as a cadet that you would have if you were under the protection of the union, I believe, once you become the sworn officer. So that one, resolved pretty quickly within Toledo Police.
Now, did you check into her background at all? I don't know that I ever did, but did she have anything in her background?
She had nothing else in her, she does not have a personnel file, nor really an IA file. Well, maybe she had a personnel file, which was just the starting paperwork of coming into as a cadet. I didn't check her criminal background, I don't believe.
Yeah, and the reason I asked
but
that,
I guess you can have I don't know if you can have a criminal background, I should say, and be taken into the police department. I know there are some laws that are broken within some of these cases while they're an officer.
Yeah, and the reason I even asked that, because going back to the OPATA investigation, what we also found is that part of the reason some of these departments were taking these bad cops that had done bad things, and they were accepting them, and maybe they were like, I got in a little bit of trouble, but we're going to take them, because a lot of these departments are having issues with trying to recruit officers. We see it, the sheriff's department a lot, corrections officers for the jail, they have a hard time recruiting people into these positions. I don't think Toledo probably ever has as many police officers as they would like to have, and we see this in a lot of departments, particularly since, the pandemic era, the George Floyd thing. I mean, since that point, police have had a really hard time bringing in full classes.
I think it's a tough job. I think they're always on the defense about every decision that they make, and I think we've seen that they're the targets of crimes themselves. Going along with what you just mentioned, there's Gavin Hull. He was one of the latest ones within the Lucas County Sheriff's Office. He's very young, 20 years old, according to his file, when he was hired by the department in 2024. He got an OVI recently on September 5th in Point Place. He's also under internal affairs investigation for drinking and snapping a utility pole clean off with his car on September 5th. I know we have a photo of him, but again, he was 20 years old when he was hired as a corrections officer. So, I know that the department, the sheriff's department, has lowered the age, as you mentioned, to try to get more people who would consider taking on those careers.
Yeah, I remember having conversations with former Sheriff John Tharp, years ago, just talking about the issues they would have bringing people in. And I know Sheriff Mike Navarre, he obviously just does not have as many officers as he would like to have, or corrections officers.
Unfortunately, there were two more within the Lucas County Sheriff's Office as well. Lieutenant Gary Condon, who I'm told has always been an outstanding employee while at the Sheriff's Office. This is a video, it's a little bit hard to see, but he got into some trouble. He was disciplined in July because there is a woman out here, and I don't know if you've ever been to the jail, but sometimes there are some characters out there, and they do become mouthy, and they say things, and they're just kind of loitering out there. But anyway, my understanding from his file is that she got aggressive with him. She said, you're nothing without your gun and your badge. So he took off his gun and badge, and you can't do that. So he was disciplined for that in that situation. But from what I understand, outside of this, he is a great employee there at the sheriff's office.
Right.
Just lost his temper on that occasion is what I was told.
Right. So going forward, again, we're going to be getting internal affairs files from all the departments. At this point, we've asked for the last year, but we do plan on doing it monthly so we can kind of keep up. And again, it's not to pick on police or target them, but I think we both agree that it's important to know some of the stuff and just don't let it hide there in the shadows.
I think at the most, you and I have talked about, it could be a deterrent for someone to say, hey, if I know that I'm going to be seen on video in the way that some of these people have been seen on video publicly, maybe I'll think about doing that thing. It could also be a positive in that the law enforcement agency will, at the very least, have a conversation that we are being watched. These files are being sought. And so you need to protect yourself and this department and uphold the badge.
Yeah, and we have every reason to believe that Walbridge is changing the way they're looking into prospective officers, because we did tell them about OPATA, and we did kind of shine a spotlight on this. And so I expect they're going to be doing things differently.
Deputy Richard Strong is another one in Lucas County. He was suspended in March, and this is an example of we hear that he was actually projecting, which is when a law enforcement officer will act in a private capacity and act as maybe bar security, which is what we understand he was doing the night of the Super Bowl, meaning the game's on, and then in the early morning hours after that. A man got into an altercation with his girlfriend there at the bar, and Deputy Strong was accused of choking this man during an altercation between the guy and the girlfriend. However, when we look, then we request the personnel and the IA file. Then we find out that 3 previous times, we ran a story on it once, and then more people come out of the woodwork. He had complaints of flirtatious behavior at traffic stops with women. And so that's something that we'll find too sometimes, is we'll run an initial story on a wrongdoing, and then we'll look into the file, and this person has previous violations of their ethical code or whatever it is within that department.
Right. I mean, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for these repeat offenders who keep getting chances. Obviously, we both understand that people do make mistakes, and as long as they're not hurting other people, it's not a major mistake. And mistakes can be made, and that we're not totally focused on that. But
and this isn't just Lucas County or the Toledo Police Department by any means, or the Walbridge Police Department. We also had a police officer, Defiance police officer, that was charged with an OVI, Lieutenant Ben Williams. This was on August 28th. He crashed his motorcycle allegedly in Paulding County as well. So this is another DUI situation.
yeah, in that case, again, he seems obviously a lieutenant, so he's a very well thought of within the department. But you worry, how many times do we see motorcycle accidents that have recently have resulted in a fatality? I mean, we see it all the time, unfortunately, recently. And so, he was allegedly driving drunk on his motorcycle, so that was concerning also.
And I think too, when you talk about why this matters, I mean, we did have, Officer Michael Ervin, he was the one who showed up to the call allegedly intoxicated. I mean, it brings into the conversation, you have the obligation to protect the public, but, this is a police officer who himself was intoxicated. Does that bring up a question of someone who's pulled over by this police officer for doing the very same thing?
Yeah.
Is there an implication there, perhaps, maybe?
I mean, that would be a concern to me. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, you don't want, if somebody's got a drinking problem, hey, let's get them treated and helped. But if they do have a drinking problem, do you really want them pulling over somebody with a drinking problem or with a drinking infraction?
So I think, kind of to wrap this up, we're not done with this, because we have realized through all this that we would like to be able to inspect these files more on a monthly basis. And there's going to be, listen, I will say, I've already started looking through some files at the Lucas County Sheriff's Office. There's files that we're not necessarily concerned with, and I will say that there is also a lot of discipline it's very military style. When I look at some of these files, people will get in trouble written up for being 3 minutes late or 4 minutes late.
Or uniform violation.
Right, or for saying that they can't work extra that day. That's, so there is a lot of discipline, I think, being handed out. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in things that put the public safety at risk. And I don't think that you can argue that any of the things that we've talked about today don't put the public safety at risk in some way.
Yeah.
So that's really what we're looking for. We're not looking to nitpick or focus on any, department in general. We're looking for repeat habitual problems that affect public safety.
Yeah, and again, going back to the Robert Austin case that I mentioned earlier, that was an original OPATA investigation. Just to give an update on him, when he became the Delta police chief, we found he was about to be fired from Sylvania Township. At that point, Delta did not choose to fire him. But then we found out that he was married to 2 different women at the same time. And while he was married to 2 separate women, he was allegedly taking illegal benefits from the Sylvania Township. Taxpayer money. And it was a significant amount of money because it was over like 7-8 years. And so when I told Delta about that, he did resign in lieu of being terminated. But the result of that is that Robert Austin has been charged with, I know he's charged with grand theft and I think another felony or something. So, he is in court.
And people should care about it, because if someone's claiming benefits for 2 marriages, then that's taxpayer money that's involved.
Right. And again, so that's comes full circle here. I mean, this came from the OPATA investigation, and now we just continue looking into this.
Yeah, we are. Thanks so much for joining us here on 11 Investigates Case Files. We'll see you next time.